Okay, should we go? Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome. So my name is Brian. I'm the legal officer at Migrants Organise.
And I'm Heike. I'm the advice manager at Migrants Organise.
And yeah, today we're going to be covering post-status benefits for migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, and specifically universal credit, PIP, and child benefit. So we're going to cover initially just kind of a brief run through of what is public fund, the biometric residence permit, and issues around bank account for migrants and asylum seekers. And then we're going to cover the three benefits that I mentioned just now. So for those of you who don't know, Migrants Organise is a charity based in London. We do campaigning and organising. So we organise and not seeker series, but we also provide ongoing and direct holistic support for migrants and asylum seekers. We do immigration, but also benefits and housing and other types of support for migrants and asylum seekers. Just a disclaimer before we start. Benefits is obviously quite a very, really, really large topic. And this seminar is just supposed to be kind of an introduction, essentially, to the main types of benefits that we usually assist our members in getting after they get their status. So it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to cover all of the different kind of technicalities when it comes to benefits, basically. But we would like to highlight CPAC, which is the Child Poverty Action Group. They're a charity as well. They provide a lot of support and information on issues around benefits, including for migrants and asylum seekers. They have an advice line and also a phone number that you can ask, you can call, because things can get really complicated when it comes to benefit, especially thinking about the different status. So if you're working with people who has EU settlement status, for example, compared to refugees, there might be some differences on different types of benefits, and it's a bit messy, essentially.
Yeah, just to add, so as Brian said, it's going to be an introduction to the main benefits that we'll cover today. But we are about 60 people on the call right now. If you've got any questions whilst we are presenting, please put them in the chat and we'll try our best to answer them.
Yeah. Oh, and just to note as well, this webinar is being recorded, but we will edit it before we upload it to our channel on YouTube after the summer. So if you speak, please bear that in mind, or if you don't see in the video, then put your questions on the chat. And the slides will be sent out afterwards, as with the other seminars. Right. Okay. So just briefly, as an introduction, for anyone who has status in the UK, including refugees, will get a biometrics residence permit. Things will change next year as the Home Office will be introducing an e-visa system. So there'll be a new system where you have to check online. But for the moment, everyone should have this pink card. This is the back view of it. And it says a few kind of important details, basically. So it talks about whether the person has recourse to public funds, for example. So if you see the top picture there, it says no public funds. It also usually contains the national insurance number already there. So for all benefits applications, usually in the BRP, you do have all the information that you require, which is the full name, date of birth, whether or not the person has public funds, and also the national insurance number. Generally speaking, to claim benefits, some people need recourse to public funds. If you're working with refugees, if they've been granted refugee status, then they will definitely have public funds. So there's no question that they can access all of the benefits that are available in the UK for British nationals as well. But this varies a lot if people have different statuses. So for example, if they are getting leave to remain based on private or family life under Article 8, then usually they would not have access to public funds unless they have specifically requested this in the application or requested that the recourse to public fund condition be lifted. And there's kind of like a separate test for that, which is different from whether or not they should be granted a limited leave based on their private or family life. As I mentioned earlier, benefits for EU citizens at the moment are very, very complex. It's a bit of a headache to understand, basically, especially for those who have pre-settled status. So we're not going to cover it because we're not being able to kind of answer your questions, essentially. But again, I would direct you to CPAC if you have any issues with this, or the Air Center. They're a charity based in London as well, and they kind of specialize on assistance for EA citizens. There are some issues with BRP recently. So a lot of people who have been granted status have not received their BRP, for example, and it can take months sometimes to chase the BRP. It's not impossible to push through the benefits applications without the BRP, but obviously having the BRP just makes life a lot easier. We've put there a link to the gov.uk website where you can go to chase BRP. So when the slides are sent out, you'll have access to it. Opening bank accounts, usually once the first thing that we usually help our members with once they get status is to open a bank account, because a lot of asylum seekers don't have a bank account. The banks will require proof of address and proof of identity. BRP and the letter from the Home Office or ClearSpring, for example, if they're based in London, or the housing provider, usually would suffice. Sometimes it's quite useful to have a supporting letter from a charity. So usually what we do, we might kind of write a short supporting letter that our member can bring to the bank just to explain their status, because a lot of kind of bank members and the people at the bank, basically, they might not have seen a biometric residence permit before. They don't really know what kind of ID it is. So usually it's quite useful to have that kind of explanation for people. That they can just hand to the managers or someone at the bank, so that they know it is a valid ID that is issued by the Home Office and should be acceptable by the bank. We have found that online banks like Monzo are typically less troublesome, because everything can be done on the app online. We usually, bear in mind that you might have to kind of explain to the person you're working with how to use it, and show them how the app works, for example. But in our experience, once people kind of understand how it works, then it can be kind of much simpler to use online bank.
And maybe just to add, Monzo, in our experience, as Brian says, works a bit better. But if anyone has heard of other banks or has any other experience they would like to share, please put it in the chat, because it's always great to hear about other banks that are quite happy to open bank accounts for people that were recently granted status.
Yeah, I think sometimes the challenge with online bank, in my experience, because there's no kind of actual physical place people can get to, it might be tricky if someone has, struggles a little bit with kind of using their phone. They need to, for example, if they need bank statements further down the line for whatever reason, then they struggle to kind of use the app, for example. Whereas with a like normal traditional bank, they can just go to the bank and ask for help. So that's something to consider. Sometimes it might be useful to open an online bank first, just so that you can kind of push through all the benefits applications, for example, and then in 6 months down the line or something like that, they can always switch to a more traditional bank once they have everything a bit more settled. If they don't have a BRP yet, the registration card or ARC can also be used. But again, a lot of the time it depends on like who the person meets at the bank, in our experience. And again, that supporting letter usually helps a lot, just to kind of clarify what is the what is the status and what is the ID that's being used. Just a side note, it is not technically illegal for asylum seekers to open a bank account, but there are kind of some regulations around this, and the bank needs to do a check, and they might be disqualified from opening a bank account if their claim has been refused, for example, or appeals rights exhausted. Okay, now let's get on to universal credit. As I'm sure a lot of people here know, universal credit was introduced a few years ago, and it's replaced a lot of the different benefits that we used to have, including things like child tax credit, housing benefit, income support, job seekers allowance, ESA, and working tax credit. So instead of having all these 6 different benefits, you have one universal credit with different elements that you can be entitled to, essentially. So everything is supposed to be kind of more efficient, and everything is done online as well. So for each universal credit applications, you have to kind of log in online, submit the applications online, and there's an online system where you have to kind of interact with the work coach and the job center around your universal credit. In order to claim, you must live in the UK, be age 18 or over, be under state pension age. What's the state pension age now? 67? So if you're working with people above that age, then it's not going to be universal credit they're applying for. It's likely going to be attendance allowance or pension credit. Just bear that in mind. You need to have less than 16,000 in savings or investments. So if you're working with recently granted refugees or migrants, usually this wouldn't be an issue, especially if they come from asylum support. They would already have been assessed as destitute by the Home Office. And obviously they need to have recourse to public funds as well to be able to claim universal credit. How to apply, as I said before, it's all online. So you have to kind of go to that link and start the application online. To be honest with you, I think as a caseworker, I quite like universal credit application compared to the previous ones, because it used to be all like based on papers and it takes quite slow, but to fill out. Whereas universal credit, the layout and everything is actually quite nice and quite easy to navigate for us, obviously. But I know a lot of people again like struggle, especially if they're not very kind of digitally literate, for example. There are some ways that we've come up with to try to assist people with this, making sure that in your appointments you write down all of the passwords, for example, for them, all of the kind of security questions on a piece of paper, or that they can keep on their wallet, or you can go to their phone and write down all of these things. We usually keep them as well in our kind of database, so then we make sure that people don't lose it, or if they lose it, then we can provide them with the information again. Because if they lose the kind of a lot of the information, then it becomes a bit of a hassle trying to kind of log back in. You have to call universal credit, go through all this kind of security questions and stuff like that. Creating a shortcut I found is quite a good trick. So if they use iPhone or Android, there is a way where you can go to the universal credit login webpage and then add a shortcut to the kind of home screen. So then it looks like an app where you just click and then it automatically directs you to that site. So then it becomes easier to explain to people, if you want to log into universal credit, if you get a text asking you to log in, you just click on that app and then enter your password and username. BRP, as I said, will make things easier because I think the job center is more familiar with biometric residence permit. They wouldn't ask too many questions, but if there's a delay, you can actually still get universal credit without a BRP. There can be other forms of ID, and the universal credit, the job center should be expected to kind of check with the Home Office as well. I've put a link to an article on free movement covering this, which provide a bit more details on what is actually the duties of the job center and what you can ask them to do.
So this is a recent change that is actually really, really positive. And we've seen, we've used this a lot with our members, and a lot of our members who only have their R card at the moment and a Home Office decision letter could start their universal credit claim. And it's made a huge difference because basically the whole universal credit process takes about 6 weeks on average. And so the sooner someone can start, the better, because then when someone moves on from their asylum support accommodation into temporary accommodation provided by the council or any other form of accommodation, it obviously helps to already have some universal credit payments in place. And just to add as well, Tom put in the chat that Lloyds Bank has been really helpful and that they were really approachable and helped to open bank accounts for refugees, even if they only had an R card and no BRP. Yeah, and Alejandra agreed. So just to share.
I think that's our experience as well now. Yeah, Lloyds is usually, I think they have like a refugee asylum seeker program. And sometimes it might be helpful to kind of get the name of the manager of your local bank. And then you kind of send people there, essentially, make things a bit easier. But yeah, there's some like practical tips. If bank account is not available when you apply for universal credit, you can still proceed. Usually we would just kind of enter a random number essentially, and then make a note of it in the journal and saying that is not actually the bank account. We just wanted it to be processed because, as Heike said, universal credit takes 5 to 6 weeks to process. And it's only, I think, after the identity check, which usually happens after 1 or 2 weeks, that you can get advance payment. So thinking about the transition from asylum support when the money is stopped to when the person will actually get universal credit, sometimes there might be a gap there. So it's important to kind of do it as soon as possible, essentially. After we submit the application, the next step usually is for identity check. And usually this is done at the job center. Are they still doing the phone one?
No, it's all at the job center. That's our experience at the moment, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with our members, I think we found the going to job center is usually a bit more easier, because then you can just ask them to go there, and things will be sorted. There's some screenshot of universal credit system for those of you who haven't seen it. So everything is laid out quite neatly, I would say. So there's the top two are kind of the main tabs. So there's the home, where you can report a change, for example, get advance payment. So with universal credit, there's a system where you can take interest-free loan from the universal credit, and then you pay it back by universal credit deducting the amount from your future payments. So for example, if you're entitled to £500, you can borrow up to £500, and then for the next 12 months, for example, they will deduce 500 divided by 12 per month, whatever that is. You can see a list of your payments. So then if, for example, the solicitor or someone else needs kind of proof of universal credit, that's usually where you go. And you can see all of the monthly payments going back to when universal credit started paying the money, and you can print it each month payment. The to-do list, this one in the middle is the most important bit, I would say, because it contains, well, the things that people need to do. So the idea behind universal credit is that it's supposed to encourage people to work. So everyone will be assigned a work coach who will help them improve their skills, for example, or go to job interviews, and they will be assigned tasks, essentially, write your CV and things like that. And this will all be put under the to-do list, and they have regular meetings with the work coach as well, and they have to comply with this, otherwise they'll get sanctioned or the universal credit might be stopped. There will be exceptions to this for individuals with disabilities in particular. I'll get to that. But the to-do list, again, is the most important thing. So usually when you log in to someone's universal credit, if you're having an appointment about benefits, then check the to-do list and see if everything's been complied with, because otherwise it might be stopped, the universal credit, or paused. The journal, it contains all the kind of correspondence with the job center. So if you want to raise issues, for example, or ask for reasonable adjustments to the work coach, explain why the person hasn't gone to kind of an appointment, for example, you use the journal.
The journal is a really useful tool as a caseworker, actually, because it allows you to communicate with the work coach, so the DWP, and there's usually the response time is fairly quick. It's usually within a few days, and then for us, our members would usually get a text message that says, please check your universal credit journal, and then we can log in with our members and help them to look through the message and sort of see what needs to be done.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. So you add journal entry, and then there's an option to say a message to the work coach, for example, and then you can just raise any issues there, essentially, and they will get read by the work coach. That's an example of the to-do list. So for example, this person is being asked to declare a footnote. As I said at the beginning, universal credit combines all these kind of different benefits that we used to have. So instead of all of those different benefits, you get one universal credit with different elements. Everyone should get a standard allowance, which is kind of the money targeted for people to cover their basic living needs and cost. And then there will be extra amounts, so extra elements depending on like people's particular circumstances. So if they have children, for example, they get extra allowances for that. Limited capability to work and work-related activity, that's disability essentially, which I will cover in a bit in next slide. If they're caring for someone, they can also get additional element. housing, if they're renting privately, universal credit will have can cover the rent or part of it at the very least. It will be based on the local housing allowance rate, depending on where the property is located. So I put there a link to the website, the local housing allowance rate website, where you can see how much people will actually get from universal credit housing if they rent privately. Most of the time, especially in London, the local housing allowance rate will actually be lower than the actual market rent price. So then it's a matter of whether people can top up the housing element using their standard allowance, for example, which might be possible, for instance, if they're also getting a separate benefit like personal independence payment. But it is quite difficult most of the time, especially in London. I think if you depending on your age, for example, if you're 35 or above, you usually, and you're single, you usually qualify for the 1-bedroom rate, which is usually enough to get a studio flat in London. Otherwise, if, well, yeah, it's more possible, I guess, depending on the quality of the of the property. But if you're single and less than 35 years old, for example, you usually qualify only for the shared bedroom rate, which is really low. And then lastly, there will be kind of deductions. So things like advance payment, for example, it will show how much is being deduced from the payment of that month, and if you're caught by the benefit cap. Yeah. Just to note that housing is covered by housing benefit still, which is an old benefit, which is provided by each local authority instead of the universal credit, if you're living in emergency or temporary accommodation arranged by the council. So if someone you're working with is being provided emergency accommodation after going to the housing team in the local authority, then the housing costs will be covered by housing benefit, not universal credit. So you, instead of declaring that as a change of circumstances in universal credit, you need to go to the local authority's website and then apply for housing benefit, and each local authority will have their own process to apply for this. Usually it will be combined with council tax credit as well, which is another separate benefit to help people pay for council tax. Yeah, other exceptions is if you're living in refuge for survivors of domestic abuse, or you live in shelter or supported housing. Yeah, and if you apply for housing benefit, you bear in mind that you need to apply to the local council who has a duty and who has provided the emergency accommodation, rather than the location of the accommodation itself. So for example, if the person you're working with went to Haringey Council and was assisted by Haringey to be provided an emergency accommodation in Anfield, then you still need to go to Haringey Council's website to apply for the housing benefit to cover the housing cost. Do you have any questions so far?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, please feel free to put any questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them once we present.
Yeah. As I said before, people get assigned a work coach because the idea is everyone will be encouraged to work or kind of improve their skills and knowledge to be able to kind of get into the job market. But if they have health conditions which prevent them from doing this, from working or engaging in what's called work-related activities, so things like, I don't know, going to English classes or stuff like that, then they need to declare that they're not fit for work. And they need, in the first instance, what they need to do is to go to the GP and get what's called a fit note. All GP surgery should be aware of this. They know what a fit note is. It's a standard template note that the GP can just fill out. It will contain a date as to when kind of the condition started and for how long the GP expect the person not to be fit to work, for example, and they need to declare it on the universal credit system. Yeah, I wanted to show in the home screen. There's like an option to report a fit note essentially, and that's what you need to use when you're reporting that someone's unfit to work. Yeah, so usually what we do is we just ask our member to kind of go to their GP and ask the receptionist for a footnote. Usually if the GP already knows kind of the conditions, then they're quite happy to provide the footnote. Or of course, you can also email the GP on behalf of the person you're working with if they're not really able to do that themselves. Once you declare the footnote, this will trigger the work capability assessment. So for those of you who are who applied for what's it called again? ESA.
Employment and support allowance.
Employment and support allowance. This kind of the work capability assessment source of kind of replaces ESA. So it's a very similar process. You will be asked to fill out a questionnaire called the UC50, and it's about how someone's conditions affect their ability to do day-to-day activities. So things like walking for 20 meters or something like that, or learning a new skill, for example. You'll be asked to fill out the questionnaire, provide medical information, and then there will be a health assessment, which can be done in person, or sometimes it's just a call. It can be quite a long call. We've had people being assessed for like 3 hours on the phone, for example. It can be quite exhausting. So do check with the person if they need kind of adjustments, and make sure that you mention any adjustments requirement for the assessment in the questionnaire. Sometimes people might need to be accompanied as well or escorted during the appointment, if they struggle to kind of find a place, for example, or struggle with advocating for themselves if they need a break, and things like that. There will be a 2 outcome after the limited capability for work assessment. Firstly, there might be, well, 3. They might, the outcome might be negative. So the assessor might say, no, actually, this person can work. Or they might say the person has limited capability for work. In that case, they will still be asked to attend the work-related activities. So things like work interviews, for example, or like things to develop their skills. But lastly, they might also be assessed as having limited capability for work and work-related activities. So work-related activities refers to things, again, like the work interviews, practice, or going to English classes to improve their skills, and that sort of thing. If they get assessed as having limited capability for work and work-related activities, they will not be asked to come for the appointment with the work coach anymore. And will receive additional payments from Universal Credit. So there will be like an additional, essentially disability top up for these individuals. If they only receive the limited capability for work, then they don't actually at the moment get any additional payments. There are some exceptions to this, depending on like when the claim started and things like that, but it gets a bit complicated. The assessment process can take months. And we've noticed kind of like a lot of delays recently as well, with this and also with PIP. So if the person, and in during that period when they are still being assessed, usually the person will still be asked to attend the work interviews. If the person really struggles to go, for example, we work with some people who can't really find the job center in the first place, for example, or they find like the whole work interview can be like quite stressful. Put it on the journal, and you can request that as a reasonable adjustment. You can say the person, has a disability. We've provided evidence of this. The job center is a public authority. They need to provide reasonable adjustments, and that can be, reducing the amount of work interviews, for example, or doing it over the phone. So it can be a bit more of a check-in, or obviously they should also be able to kind of cancel it immediately. But it kind of depends on how bad kind of the impact is of the work interviews on the individual.
Yeah, in addition to the delays that Brian has mentioned, we've also seen a lot of negative decisions recently. So a lot of our members are disabled, and we do ask for the limited capability for work and work-related activities because of their disability, but also that maximizes someone's income. And it's the only extra bit someone can receive through Universal Credit. And it seems in particular in the last 2 months that there have been a lot of negative decisions, and people weren't awarded the limited capability for work and work-related activities component. Yeah, just to add from our side.
We're going to cover appeals, right? Yeah, in the end, we're going to cover as well, like what to do when this assessment is refused or the PIP is refused.
So yeah, if this happens, what I've just mentioned, so if someone asks for the extra support because of their disability and this is refused, which is sort of what is happening at the moment to most of our members, then you can ask for mandatory reconsideration of the decision. So the mandatory reconsideration needs to be done within 1 month of the decision being made. And our understanding is that it needs to be requested through the journal on someone's universal credit account. But our experience has also shown that it's very inconsistent. So some of our members are giving a link on the universal credit journal where they then can upload their mandatory reconsideration letter. And some other members were asked to send it by post to the Department for Work and Pensions. So it's been very inconsistent, which makes it a bit hard to advise members on. But usually, so the mandatory reconsideration process is an internal review process. Usually, in the majority of the cases, the job centre, the Department for Work and Pension won't change their initial decision. So basically, it's just a delaying tactic in many cases. So we'd request the mandatory reconsideration. The DWP will maintain their initial decision. And then if they still say, well, the person isn't entitled to the extra component, then we'll need, we'd assist our members to lodge the appeal to the Social Security Tribunal.
This is an example of the payments. So if you go to like the payments tab, basically, and then you can see kind of a breakdown of what you're entitled to. And then as you can see, it's broken up very neatly in terms of, well, how much is standard allowance, how much is for housing, how much of it is the limited capability for work top up, and the total entitlements. Okay. I think that's all we have on universal credit.
Okay, then we'll move on to child benefit. So child benefit, who can get child benefit? Someone can get child benefit if they're responsible for bringing up a child who is under 16 and or if they're under 20, if the child stays in approved education or training. And there's no limit to how many children someone can claim child benefit for. It is though that only one person can get child benefit. So if it's a family, 2 parents, then one of them will get the child benefit. But for example, if the parents are separated, only one of the parents can get the child benefit. How to claim? So there is an online form, there's a paper form, and you can also support someone to call the child benefit helpline to make the claim. We usually either use the online form or the paper form because calling, there's usually a really long wait before you get through and you can speak to someone. So this is an example of the child benefit claim form. It's a fairly simple application process compared to a lot of the other benefits. The form is not very long, the questions are not particularly complicated, and also the documents that need to be provided in support of the child benefit application there aren't too many. What needs to be provided is the biometric residence permit of the people claiming, so the parent and the child. We usually certify the BIP as well, so please don't send the originals because we've had a lot of original BIPs that were sent in that were lost in the post. So yeah, send in a photocopy, ideally a certified photocopy of the BIP. If the child was born abroad, then the original birth certificate needs to be sent in though, and then the Child Benefit Office should return them. If the child was born in the UK, then it's sufficient to just add on the child benefit form the system number of the birth certificate. So then at least you don't need to send in any originals, so nothing can get lost in the post. Someone needs to add their national insurance number onto the child benefit form, their bank details, and also the Child Benefit Office has a specific form of authority. So we've added the link to that specific form of authority. It's just good to know because the child benefit application process is very slow. and you might want to call them after some time and chase the status of the child benefit application. And they will only speak to you if you've signed this very specific form of authority.
Tip there.
If the child was born abroad, they will accept copies verified by the JCP. Is that the job center? Or
Not too sure, actually.
the JCP?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
the job center. Yes, that is correct. So that's also another option. Yes. If you can't verify the BIPs, then someone can, the person you're supporting can also take their BIP to their local job center and get them verified there. So this is something very positive about child benefits. You can make a request for the child benefit to be backdated. This only applies to refugees, but it can be a fair bit of extra money, and it can really, really help someone, especially whilst they're in this process of just having received their status, moving out from the asylum support accommodation and moving into temporary accommodation or private rented accommodation. So when you make the initial claim for child benefit, you request for the child benefit to be backdated either to the date the child was born, if the child was born in the UK and the asylum claim was already ongoing, or to the date the claim was made. So the asylum claim was made. So let's say, I don't know, we've got a woman seeking asylum called Anna. Anna arrives in the UK in 2019 and has a 3-year-old child and makes a claim for asylum in 2019, and then gets her status and has been waiting for a very long time because there are long delays in the process. And then makes a claim for child benefit gets approved, and she asks for the child benefit to be backdated, and then it will be backdated from the date she was granted. So let's say now in June 2024. So for 5 years. So that's a lot of money. Last week, we had someone who received £6,000 in backdated child benefit. And it's, we usually just include one covering letter. So we complete the child benefit form. We use the paper form in most cases, and then include a covering letter. And we refer to the backdating rules that I've put here on the slides. And then in most cases, the child benefit office applies that rule. So that it's just very positive, and it's a fair bit of extra money. So I've put on the slides as well the rate for the child benefit for the oldest child at the moment is £25.60 per week. And for any additional children is £16.95 per child. So this is something, so we don't really use the online form to claim child benefit, but I've seen online that the Citizens Advice Bureau says that the applications will be processed more quickly if you use the online form. If anyone knows about that, please put any of your experience in the chat. It would be great to find out, because then we'll start using the online form. But we use the paper form at the moment, and it's very, very slow. So from the date you sent in the child benefit claim form, the paper form, it takes, at the moment for most of our members, it takes 4 to 6 months until they're paid child benefit. And then it's usually a quite big payment because it's backdated. It helps from our experience to phone the child benefit office to ask them for an update of the application and to chase the progress of the application. Okay, so there's a really interesting question in the chat saying, we've seen several clients who've not got the birth certificates for children. We are sending alternative evidence, but have not received any decisions. Do you have any experience of what alternative evidence is satisfactory? Yes, we've seen that in many cases as well. Yeah, a lot of our members might not have the birth certificates on them when they come to the UK and have no means of obtaining them. And we usually, what we've provided is anything from the Home Office that confirms the relationship with the child. So it could be the asylum screening interview, the substantive interview, and the decision letter that lists the children as the dependents, because that's other official evidence that shows the relationship with the child. I think also if the children go to school, letters from school, anything from the GP that shows that they are the children of the parent, just to prove the relationship. And it has worked for us in the past. Do you have any other ideas of evidence?
No, I think those, yeah. And then obviously PAP if they don't budge.
if child benefit is refused, it's the same process as for universal credit if there's any incorrect decision. So first you ask for a mandatory reconsideration of the decision, and this needs to be done within 1 month of the date of the decision letter. Again, this is an internal reviews process, although for child benefit, it actually works a little bit better than for universal credit from our experience. But then again, if the initial decision is maintained, then you can make an appeal to the Social Security Tribunal. Right, then we move on to personal independence payment, PIP, which is a disability benefit. So not all of the people you're supporting might be eligible for it. It focuses on long-term health conditions. And again, it's a very long process to apply for PIP. But if it is awarded, it is a lot of extra support. It's the extra financial support, but also if someone gets PIP, they might be entitled to other benefits. So for example, that if someone receives PIP, then they might have someone caring for them that might then be able to apply for carers allowance. Or if someone receives PIP, they might then be able to apply for a freedom pass, and which would allow them to travel for free. So PIP focuses on help that someone needs with activities of daily living or mobility issues. So activities of daily living, that includes everything from sort of getting dressed in the morning, washing, preparing food, socializing, communicating with other people, budgeting. And the test is usually someone should be awarded PIP if they struggle to carry out any of these activities of daily living or mobility the majority of the days of a week. And it's really if they struggle or if they find it difficult. It's not whether
they can't do
them. It's important to note that it's not based on someone's ability to work. So someone could be working, but has a disability and can still receive personal independence payments. So it's not means tested. And it includes all types of health conditions, physical, sensory, mental, or cognitive. The majority of our members who receive PIP have a diagnosis of, have mental health issues. So it's usually a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, or any other mental health issues. But that's sort of the majority of the members that we support to apply for PIP. There is still a bit of a stigma, I think, or there's something in the decision-making process that we feel if someone has a visible disability, so is visibly disabled, sits, or has mobility issues, then it's easier to get PIP awarded. But as I said, the majority of our members claim PIP and have a mental health condition. So as I said, PIP is made up of two components, the daily living component and the mobility component, and each component is split into different descriptors. So we've put the link here that breaks down the different descriptors. And then again, each component has a standard rate, an enhanced rate, and basically everyone is awarded different points, and that then determines how much money they'll receive. And I've put on the slide as well how much money the different rates are, because again, it's receiving PIP actually makes, financially it can help someone a lot. And if someone gets the enhanced rate for daily living, it's £108.55, and mobility is 71. And we have quite a lot of our members actually that receive either the standard daily living rate or the enhanced daily living rate. Mobility, not as much.
So they are separate assessment, just to point out. So you get one assessment for the daily living, and you get either standard or enhanced, and then you get another for the mobility, either standard or enhanced, or of course, or you might not qualify for it at all. So someone might just be getting the daily living standard rate, for example, and no mobility. So it can be like a combination of those four amount.
How to apply for personal independence payment. So again, we've put the link on the slides, but it's a phone application. So you will need to be with a person that is applying for PIP and phone the PIP claim line. It's usually a bit of a wait, and then the phone call takes about 20-25 minutes. And during that phone call, they will just ask you for details, personal details of the claimant, their main health condition, their GP details, and then basically and their bank details. And then after that, they will send out a form, which is called How Your Disability Affects You form, that will then need to be completed. Once PIP is awarded, it will be backdated to the date you made that phone call. So it's actually quite useful to make that phone call as soon as possible. If you think someone is eligible for PIP, make that phone call, because the whole process at the moment, I think we see it takes roughly around 9 months. I think that's still quite optimistic. I think in some cases it takes a year. So so you make the claim, or you request the form over the phone, then the form is being sent out. At the moment already, this stage takes 3 to 4 months. There are huge delays. And then you can support the person to complete the form. In the form, there are some questions about how people, how their disability affects them to do day-to-day activities, what are the difficulties, and also how is their mobility affected, what is their disability. It's really helpful to back it all up by medical evidence. So if you've got anything if they're being seen by any mental health team, if you've got any letters from them or anything about their mobility issues, it's really helpful to include that. Then you send everything off, and then there will be an assessment, which is either over the phone or in person. And again, it's a bit like the Universal Credit Work Capability Assessment. It can be quite intrusive and very long and quite difficult, because people are being asked very detailed questions about their disability and how this affects them in their day-to-day living. And then once the assessment is finished, then again, the person will need for a bit longer until there's a decision on their PIP. So as I said, we see, between 9 months and 12 months.
Yeah. There's something to add on that in terms of like how difficult these assessments can be, especially if you're working with someone with mental health issues, for example, who can't really explain their disabilities, or doesn't have English as their first language as well. It can be really difficult to answer these forms, the PIP form, but also the limited capability for work assessment for universal credit. And I think it's important to bear in mind as well that by the time you're at that stage where you're applying for benefits, the person probably has gone through a lot of medical assessments for their asylum claim, interviewed by the Home Office. They've been asked a lot of these questions again and again and again. Housing applications where they have to show their vulnerability and why they're kind of more vulnerable than the average person. So it's a lot of like repeating these things again and again and again. So I think certain things, it's just part of the system, unfortunately, at the moment. But I think it's important for us to also think about how we work with the people to not to kind of add that too much, especially when we're helping them to fill out the form. So how can we ensure that we don't also spend 3 hours on, asking them about these questions, and then they will have to go through the same thing again when they are being assessed by the health assessors, for example. Things like making sure you read all of the documents first. If they have an asylum solicitor beforehand, you can always ask them if there's medical evidence that can be submitted, and make sure that you read them through first and see if you can kind of pull out some details and some things that you can kind of help the person fill out, essentially, rather than kind of expecting them to spell out everything for you in terms of filling out the form.
If someone is really, really unwell and you have strong medical evidence showing this, you can also ask for a paper assessment. It's not always granted. They might still want to see the person in person and do a face-to-face assessment, but it's still worth asking. Phil is saying that they are not experiencing delays that long. Unfortunately we are. And Kim says, yes, when working with claimants who are migrants and have moved to the UK recently, less so with other claimants. Okay, so if PIP is refused, it's the same process as what we've said before about when universal credit is refused or child benefit is refused. You'll need to make a request for mandatory reconsideration. We usually write a letter and explain which descriptors are in dispute, and then we explain why we think the person qualifies and explain how many points we think they should be awarded. If there's any additional medical evidence you can send in at this stage, it's incredibly helpful. But I think even like quite strong claims where we feel we've already provided a lot of medical evidence, I think in the majority of the cases, we do see that the initial decisions are maintained, and then we would lodge an appeal. So it's an appeal to the Social Security Chamber. You'd need to include a photocopy of the mandatory reconsideration note that you've received. The appeal form is actually fairly straightforward. It's not regulated advice, so it's not as immigration advice that is regulated, so you can represent the person you're supporting. Unfortunately, there's no legal aid available. But yeah, the hearings are usually in person, or could also be over video call if you request that. Yeah, and from our experience, most of the PIP claims, most of the applications, they win on appeal. I think the great majority. And then basically because the process has taken that long at that stage, then our members receive a quite big back payment as well.
Yeah. There is a charity called Free Representation Unit. They take on, like, they help people appeal in the Social Security Tribunal and Employment Tribunal. But so if your service doesn't have capacity to help with this, you can check them out so and see if a referral can be made. The other thing I wanted to add is in terms of the additional evidence, PIP assessment and limited capability for work assessment are different, but they are kind of similar. So, both of them, it's not about the disabilities or the health conditions per se, but about how those affect day-to-day activities or the person's ability to do certain day-to-day activities. So with PIP, you have things like washing and bathing and cooking and stuff like that. Whereas with limited capability for work, it's much more specific, like can you lift a box or whatever. But obviously they're quite like related essentially. So usually what we do is also, if, for example, the person has been granted limited capability for work, but somehow the PIP has been completely refused, then mention that in your mandatory request. For example, this person actually been assessed and awarded limited capability for work, and we understand that the descriptors are different and these are different benefits, but obviously they still relate to the same person, and they are still kind of relevant evidence for the PIP to consider. They just can't ignore it completely, essentially. And I think that's quite like a strong evidence to show that something was wrong there, because you do get things like that the person is obviously really disabled and have a lot. We've provided a lot of medical evidence, and then somehow everything comes back with 0 points, which is really ridiculous.
We've got a few more minutes for any other questions.
I think there was
something about child benefit earlier, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Asylum seekers who are waiting the decision, some are within the hostels for a few years. Can they apply for child benefit when they first get to the hotel?
And then it will be backdated.
So they will need to be granted refugee status first. And then once they're granted refugee status, they can apply for backdated child benefit to the date when they made their claim for asylum.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think we'll end there, 2 minutes before 2 o'clock. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for coming. We hope it's been helpful. And yeah, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.